Good morning and welcome to First Coast Connect. I'm Anne Schindler. Today, the toxic legacy of a catastrophic gas station explosion in Saint Augustine. More than a decade later, a new film explores the continuing health impacts on firefighters there. Then, former JEA executives who predicted doom and gloom for the city-owned utility now want to prevent jurors in their criminal case from hearing about the utility's current financial stability. Plus, Players by the Sea pulls back the curtain on its latest production on the early days of Carole King's songwriting career. And a carefully curated list of the First Coast's best cultural offerings in the week ahead. But first, it was a conflagration that changed the lives of many Saint Augustine firefighters, and it's the subject of a new documentary, Behind the Smoke. That film screens tonight as part of the Saint Augustine Film Festival. I'd like to welcome to the program that film's director, Jacob Whitley. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for being here. And Lieutenant Sheryl Rodgers, longtime Jacksonville firefighter and paramedic, and regional coordinator for Florida Firefighters Safety and Health Collaborative. Welcome, Sheryl.
Thank you.
And we invite our listeners' calls and questions, particularly first responders who've either responded to this fire or have concerns about the cumulative effect of either toxic or traumatic exposures on the job. Give us a call at 549-2937. Email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org or message us on Facebook or Instagram. You can also tag us on X at FCC On Air. Jacob Whitley, this incident in August 2011 involves a series of explosions at a BP gas station that was located at the corner of State Road 16 and Masters Drive in St. Augustine. There were multiple explosions that day of fuel tanks, of storage tanks, of gas pumps, and a fireball that really could be seen from miles and miles around. So amazingly, nobody died that day, but it did have impacts. How did you come to tell the story of this fire? How did you learn about it? And why did you think it was an important story to tell?
Well, a lot of that actually, I have to give credit to Lonnie Riley and the Riley family. I had done a documentary on my uncle, who was a fallen firefighter in Orange County, California. And she had seen that documentary, reached out to me, explained that story, and went into kind of how the amount of heat and what was basically being burned, and all these toxins in the air, and different particles being absorbed into the body that seemed to have affected her husband, who was one of the first responder firefighters there that day. And she wanted to tell the story of basically all different types of injuries, ailments like that, PTSD, just to kind of create an awareness, if you will, about it. And the way she pitched it to me, I just really thought it was a brilliant idea and wanted to jump on board and be involved with it. And it was the next step in kind of making firefighter documentaries my thing, I guess. And we just kind of went from there.
Let's hear a little bit of the trailer Behind the Smoke that premieres tonight in St. Augustine.
911, what's your emergency?
Right across the street from us, just blew up.
Where?
Corner of Masters and 16.
Masters and 16. The gas station blew up?
The BP station.
The building is on fire?
Yes, ma'am.
One of the guys came up to me and he said, I remember he was choked up. And he said, Captain, I didn't think we were going to make it. And I told him, I said, I didn't think we were going to make it either.
Sheryl Rodgers, you were not there that day, but you know many people that were. What do you recall from that incident?
So I work with a couple of the guys that were there on my side job, and I remember them talking about it. I remember them talking about the intense heat, especially after they had arrived on scene. I guess one of the tanks let go, and the fireball got even bigger than it was when they were first there. It was definitely a hairy situation, and I remember them describing just how intense it was.
And Jacob Whitley referred to Lonnie Riley. Her husband, Michael, was there. He was in the smoke for a number of hours fighting that fire. And like you said, they were going in as the explosions were continuing. What is it like for firefighters when they've been on a scene as long as that in conditions like that?
Well, exhaustion is the first thing that comes to mind. It's exhaustion at a whole different level that, you didn't know existed before. And then you're just like, kind of like Chance said in that trailer, uh, I can't believe we made it out, just grateful that nobody got hurt and you didn't have to see any of your fellow firefighters hurt. Yeah, it's just, you're just, it takes some time to process and collect after something like that big.
So nobody died that day, but there were long-term impacts. Michael Riley suffered a number of really profound illnesses. He eventually died not long ago. His wife, Lonnie Riley, spoke in earlier interviews about what he endured. Let's hear a little bit from her.
We cook his meals for him. We have to help him eat. We have to help him use the restroom. We have to do physical therapy. Sometimes there's a new Michael. We wake up and he's lost a level of what he used to be able to do. And we just deal with that until the next decline comes.
Jacob Whitley, you worked with Lonnie on this film. She wasn't able to be here today. She did send a statement saying, that she supports the film, the filmmaking effort, and the message that it has. But what was it like working with her and asking her to tell her story? It's obviously still a very difficult and raw topic for her.
There were some aspects that were kept private for good reason. But for the most part, I think she surprisingly was very open about a lot of her story. And working with her was great. She ended up coming with a lot of resources that she probably accumulated once Michael wasn't able to take care of himself. And that's just the way the fire community is. I'm sure Sheryl can attest to. When my uncle passed away, it was everybody and their brother and mother and everybody just shows up to help the family that of these heroes that are in need. And it's there's something known as Southern hospitality, but that's just everywhere when it comes to first responders and their families that need things. So it was basically her being able to leverage that, I think, really made an impact on what we were able to put into this film and provide like the at the beginning of the trailer there, which is also the beginning of the movie, the 911 calls was something she was able to accumulate, which really added to the production value, if you will. So there's it was one of the reasons I insisted in giving her the title of producer for the film, because she just involved herself so much and allowed basically this film to happen.
So Michael Riley, shortly after the 2011 fire, he developed a rash on his head that was really difficult to treat. His wife noticed that immediately, and then a couple of years later began to notice a really significant decline. He was diagnosed with Parkinsonism, early onset Alzheimer's, and he was declining significantly. They did at some point file suit, Sheryl, unsuccessfully. The statute had, the time to file that civil claim against the gas station and the truck company and the truck driver that was filling those pumps at the time of the explosion, that had run. So they were not able to recover any money. How common is that for someone who is exposed on the job to these kind of toxins in terms of how quickly something like that manifests?
Well, it can manifest, in my experience and people I've talked to, very quickly, and then it can take years to manifest. And unfortunately, like in Michael's case, it was too long, and by the time they realized probably where it came from and what it was and what caused it, it was too late. Prior to presumptive legislation that we have in place now, it was very difficult to prove that, where it came from, because, they could, any good lawyer is going to argue that he could have gotten it anywhere else, or any firefighter could get cancer anywhere else, or these neurological conditions or anything like that. So,
and explain to us what the presumptive legislation is that you're referencing, because that was a big deal when that passed a couple of years ago.
Yes, very big deal. They fought for over 20 years to get it passed. Basically what it is in the state of Florida, if you're a firefighter by occupation and you develop one of the 26 cancers that are on this bill, it is presumed or assumed that you got cancer from being a firefighter. So you no longer have to prove that it came from the hazards you're exposed to in your job, which is huge for firefighters like me, who were diagnosed with cancer, because it takes that element out of it. Now you can just move forward with your treatment and move forward with compensation and help for it.
And you don't have to lose, as you did in your case, significant leave time, out-of-pocket costs for medical expenses.
Correct. Yep.
If you're comfortable, tell us a little bit about what your diagnosis was. Is this something that you refer to as an occupational cancer?
Yes, I absolutely am 100% convinced that I got my cancer from the job. I was diagnosed with triple negative right breast cancer 3 days after my 38th birthday. Triple negative is the rarest, most aggressive form of breast cancer that you can get. Normally, it's associated with a BRCA1, BRCA2 mutation. One of the first things they did when I was diagnosed was test me for that mutation, and I tested negative. They sent me to a geneticist. I've had numerous genetic testing since then and tested negative for all of them.
And explain what the significance is if you test negative on a genetic level for that cancer.
So basically, it just means you're not genetically predisposed to get cancer. And I have no family history of breast cancer either. So.
And that typically, though, is one of those genetic cancers, right? The triple negative.
Oh, yeah, definitely. They, like I said, it's usually associated with that BRCA1, BRCA2.
And the fact that you don't have that kind of indicates to you even more that it was a workplace related.
Yeah.
We just want to reset here for a second. We're talking about a new film that's premiering tonight in Saint Augustine. It's called Beyond the Smoke. It's based on a 2011 fire and the firefighters that suffered impacts because of the exposure that they saw at that fire. If you're a first responder or you have a comment about workplace safety for first responders, please give us a call at 549-2937. You can also email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. You can also reach out on social media. So, Sheryl, you have worked since your diagnosis to bring attention to the issue of exposure in the workplace, and it goes beyond just what you might encounter when you're walking into a burning house.
Yes. I think, and I say all the time, I think the smoke and the chemicals that we encounter in a structure fire or a house fire are the low-hanging fruit. I think there's a myriad of other things that we're exposed to in our workplaces and in our job that can contribute to cancer. And now, thanks to a lot of the work out of the University of Miami down in Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer Center and their Firefighter Cancer Initiative, their scientists and researchers have shown those exposures outside of even structure fires and smoke.
There are a lot of things burning when you walk into a fire type situation. There could be cleaning fluids, explosive products that are on the property, discharging ammo. So there's a lot of real threats. But some of the things that you've looked at are really seemingly benign, like uniforms.
Yep. Uniforms are bunker gear that we wear that keeps us safe. Has chemicals in it that help protect us in those extreme environments, but they're also deadly to us. That equipment and that gear is stored in our fire stations, and they've learned that it can move around as dust particles and get into the stations. And then, we talked about the smoke and the fires. Every textile is treated with chemicals to make it fire resistive, water resistive, stain resistive, and when those things burn, they off gas those chemicals, and it's deadly to us.
And that's not unlike the firefighting foam that's used to fight some of these gas fires.
Yep.
Which actually was brought to this fire. It was used at this fire to try to suppress it. So, Jacob, I want to ask you, first of all, we have a question on Facebook that perhaps you can answer first. Is your documentary going to be available on any streaming services anytime soon?
Yes. If you go to behindsmoke.com, you can find a couple of options for streaming. The big two would be Amazon Prime Video and Tubi TV. The Amazon one is a purchase and rental, and it's not subscription, unfortunately. And Tubi TV is free to watch. It just has commercials, and you basically make a simple account. So those are the big two, but there are a couple others which you can find on behindsmoke.com. There's no the.
Okay. And then, of course, it is tonight also at 7:30 at Lewis Auditorium in Saint Augustine, and there are tickets available on the Saint Augustine Film Festival website. But, Jacob, I want to ask you, the film explores more than just physical exposures to chemicals. It also covers the issue of trauma and how that impacts firefighters. In the case of this fire, what did you learn from the firefighters that you interviewed about how it affected them?
There was a lot of very interesting things. My biggest personal focus on this film was the PTSD aspect. I had a grandfather who struggled with it after Vietnam, so it's always been a topic that I've had an interest in and kind of exploring. There's a couple of things that stand out. I could probably talk all day about, but there is one quote that always comes to mind, and that's it was by George Jacobs, the fire chief, who mentioned the question people have of why would someone commit suicide, and he basically explained that there's just, when you're dealing with that internally, there's just so much trauma that every thought is a negative thought, everything's painful to think about, and then all of a sudden the thought of suicide enters your mind, and it's the one happy thought you've had in a long time. And then if you're in that state, you think that's the answer, and if something doesn't snap you back, you're going to end up doing it. So it was kind of definitely a deep dive into that type of mindset, rather than just openly saying it's an issue. It was a better way to help understand it, if you will.
Sheryl, you're nodding, and that really is kind of a shocking statement to say that, that the thought of suicide would actually be a happy thought.
I've heard it described as it's the one time you feel like you're finally in control. If you think about, as first responders, we're used to going into horrible situations and taking control. And we're in our own horrible situation within our own minds, and we feel out of control. We often don't know how to deal with that or handle that. And I've heard it said that way, when suicide enters your mind, now I have a plan. I'm finally going to get out of this. And it's the first time they usually say that they finally feel at peace.
Of course, there is a number that people can call if they are feeling suicidal and need immediate help. That's 988. That's a number that is available 24/7. And that's worth mentioning. Michael Riley's wife, Lonnie, in the film talks about, what her husband did in his lifetime. He was a firefighter for over 30 years, 8 years at least in Saint Augustine before that fire. And she talked about what she thought people owe firefighters and first responders. Let's hear a little bit of that.
He devoted his life to other people. He just wanted to help other people. So how can you not repay that? They are not disposable. When something happens to them, we shouldn't turn our back. We know that they are always going to be there for us. And it just feels like, shouldn't we be the same? Shouldn't we be there for them?
Jacob, what do you think that this film will do on that front? Do you think that it helps reinforce that idea of, being supportive of first responders in kind of the myriad ways and the challenges that they face?
As long as the film can get out there for people to see, I think it definitely helps share the idea that these people we see every day aren't just invincible. They're vulnerable, basically, just as any of us are. And just because they're in uniform doesn't mean they don't have their own problems. Obviously, without doubt, we should be looking up to these individuals, all first responders of any industry. But I think not necessarily removing the veil of heroism, but understanding that, that basically they're not invincible, and that's okay. It's okay. Another quote from the film, it's okay not to be invincible.
Sheryl, I want to ask you about that, because it's not just, people thinking that they're invincible, but really first responders a lot of times feel invincible. I mean, they go into this really difficult career. They've accomplished great physical feats. They've shown that they have incredible endurance in difficult situations. So some of that messaging would really be penetrating their own self-image.
Right. We develop, it's referred to as Superman mentality. You kind of, you cheat death so many times, and you kind of feel like, oh, nothing can touch me, I'm invincible. And I always say, we're all invincible until we're not. And I remember thinking I was invincible until I got that cancer diagnosis. And, it's hard to talk to those first responders that still have that invincible mentality because, perspective is everything, I say. And I totally appreciate that my perspective is different from others because of what I've gone through. But that's the one big message I try to send. It's at this point, it's not a matter of if you're going to be diagnosed with cancer or probably if you're going to develop some form of PTSD in your careers, it's when. And, the more we can educate them and equip them to be ready to deal with that when it happens, I think we're staying ahead of the game. And the resources are there. The conversations are being had. Just on the level of PTSD, I've had more conversations around the kitchen table at the firehouse than we've ever had in the last 20 years of my career, where people have been cutting onions in the room, and eyes get watery, and that never happened at a fire station before. So I think that the fact that the discussions are being had now, that's one big step. But in my opinion, we just still have so much further to go.
What would you, knowing what you know, what would you have done differently yourself?
I always say I would go back and be a firefighter all over again. But yes, there were some things I would probably some changes I would make. We used to carry our bunker gear into the fire station at night and sleep with it next to our beds. And we never washed our gear. We didn't have gear extractors back then. So and the sootier and the dirtier your gear was, the better. It was kind of a badge of honor to have that. So that stinky, smelly gear full of carcinogens, and we just lay it next to our beds every night and sleep with it.
That's not done
There.
anymore?
No, we don't carry it in the fire station anymore at all. It's, in fact, every station in Jacksonville has signs that say no gear inside the station everywhere. Now, unfortunately, there's still some that want to have that dirty, sooty gear. That's something we're still trying to overcome. But we're banging the drum loud that stuff's horrible for you. You need to get it off your gear. You need to wash your gear. You need to wash your skin as soon as you get out of a fire because it permeates through your gear. So yeah, those messages are being sent.
And Jacob, what kind of response has the film gotten so far?
Well, it hasn't been available too long, but overall I would say it's had a positive response just in the viewership aspect of people very much enjoying it. Personally, I'm very pleased with it. I'd say it's probably one of my better pieces of work so far. As far as a response for what the goal of the film was to do, of kind of spreading the word and stuff, it's, at least in my inner circles, it's created some minor conversations, but I think it still needs to be shared and get out there to create a certain awareness. Just in the aspect of the carcinogens, I actually had a conversation with one of my father's neighbors who wanted to burn a couch, and I told him why that was a bad idea. But a lot of that had come from what I had learned from this film. So there's just definitely a lot of information out there that is lacking in communities.
And real particular interest, I would guess, for this screening tonight in Saint Augustine, where this happened. Is that what you're hearing, Jacob?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, because they witnessed it and saw the smoke from a distance and things like that, there's definitely a lot of, just in the ads I have on social media for the film, a lot of responses in that respect of people basically saying they remember it happening. That's kind of the extent of it. They named like the exact location they were, but that doesn't really go much farther than that so far anyways.
All right. Well, Jacob, Whitley, Sheryl, Rodgers, thank you so much for being here and talking about this film and this issue.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having me.